Economics, University of Campinas in Brazil, which he says is a center for political discourse in the country. He is a coordinator of the BRICS Network University in economics. He was a visiting professor in many universities, including the University Sorbonne, Moscow State University of International Relations in Russia, and others. Over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, thank you very much for having me. Thanks, Shandu. Thanks for inviting me and for all the organizers. I'd like to congratulate you for this very important and timely meeting. I'm very happy to be here. I'll have a PPT, and then here it goes. So what I'll do here is I'm going to present some ideas that I developed with a co-author, and which is in the next slide. You can see it was published recently in the New Political Economy journal. We can go to yes, this is the article. And the idea is discussing and conceptualizing what we name it as the International Division of Finance. You can move ahead. We can go to the next slide, please. As an analogy, obviously, to the International Division of Labor, which has been discussed in economics since the very origin of what we know as modern economics, by David Ricardo, which said that finally countries should specialize, as you know, in their endowment, in the sectors where they have advantages, and then international trade will bring equal benefits for everybody. And then we started having critical views on that with Marx, and later on with the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean ECLAC in Latin America. And in the next slide, they developed a very powerful theory. This school, which later became known as the Latin American Structuralism. We can go to the next slide, please. Has many problems in terms of also the proposals they made, but they have a very powerful diagnosis on how international capitalism works, especially by understanding that, well, obviously we have a center and a periphery, but more than that, understanding that the interaction between these two poles of capitalism do not take the global south or the underdeveloped countries into the position of the developed countries. It's rather the contrary. We are not developing countries. We are underdeveloped countries, Brazil, Sri Lanka, and the global south. We are underdeveloped countries, and it's not a matter of maturity and time for us to reach development. Because obviously underdevelopment and development, they not only coexist, but they complement each other. Actually, underdevelopment is not a stage for development, it's not a deviation of the development process, but this is like capitalism works. The modus operandi of capitalism works with development and underdevelopment, and the underdeveloped countries have a function for the developed countries. They are both sides of one coin, right? The periphery is functional to the development of the center. Then we go to the next slide. And then this idea was developed in the mid-20th century, especially focusing on the division between agricultural countries and industrial countries. But our claim is that the central elements of this idea, this conceptual framework, are still valid, obviously requiring some updates. One of them is that, well, the International Division of Labor changed, so nowadays we don't have any more peripheral countries only producing agricultural goods. We have Vietnam, we have Mexico, we have many peripheral countries which are doing industrial goods, but they are in some positions in the division of labor which are still those with low technology, with low value added, so that there is a whole need to reconceptualize the International Division of Labor. But, and here is our point, we have next slide please, we have to understand and update this theory by understanding that we are now living in a financialized capitalism, right? Next slide. And this ECLAC, the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, European back in 1949, they highlighted only this productive technological dimension of the peripherality, right? Why? Because we were under Bretton Woods system, so with constraints to the financial flows, so they highlighted this productive technological dimension of peripherality. But there was already in 65, and we have other examples, but a critical voice from Africa, he was mentioned by one of my colleagues, Kwame Nkrumah, in this very interesting book. He is one of those who already in the 60s was already talking about finance as one of the most important vectors of neocolonialism, right? So even for countries which were independent, they had to deal with new colonialism, and one of the vectors for neocolonialism was precisely through finance. Chandru mentioned some issues related to that. And then if we come to our current era, even more, so we are talking about digitalization, about Bitcoin, we have those far-right wing governments in Latin America and Donald Trump, and the weaponization of the US dollar. So this whole discussion about the asymmetries of the international monetary and financial system and the consequences to the periphery of the world are even more relevant today than they were in the last century. Let's move ahead. That's why we try to understand that it's useful to conceptualize this idea of the international division of finance in an analogy to the international division of labor. Let's move ahead. And what's the idea? Well, there is a structural differentiation between the center and the periphery, and there is a functionality of the periphery to the center when we look into the modus operandi of the international monetary and financial system nowadays. So we have to look into the qualitative differences of the currencies and financial assets which compose the international monetary and financial system, understanding again that those differences are not something related again to the maturity, to the timing of the different countries of the world, but they are constructed in a qualitatively different way in order for the periphery to function, to be dependent and functioning to the center. Let's move ahead. So this is the difference. Those are the differences for the international division of labor. Coming back, so I already mentioned it. Even nowadays, even nowadays, if we don't have the dichotomy anymore between agricultural and industrial countries, we do have dichotomies, right? So the center is still, it is the smile curve, for those who know it. The center is in the tasks which are high value added, so high technology, the periphery low value added, low technology. And if we move, now we can go to the international division of finance, the next slide. We also have very important differences and qualitative differences. So the center is the place where, first of all, investors, they will raise funds, right? So liabilities for investments all over the world. And they offer the assets which are aimed at maintaining the wealth and defending the wealth in moments of crisis. Whereas the periphery, next slide, offers the assets and currencies which enable, first of all, the diversification of the international investors' portfolios, and relatedly, the valorization and recompositing of this portfolio's profitability. So in very clear terms, the center offers liquidity and safety, the safe haven, and the periphery offers the assets which can be considered as riskier, but which will offer high yields, potentially offer high yields, right? Let's move ahead. So this is just to show that finally it's part of the international liquidity cycles, because then investors all over the world, they, in moments of appetite for the risk, they go in the direction of less liquid assets, riskier assets, and they are prone to invest in Brazil with Real, in Argentina with Peso, in India or Sri Lanka with Rupee, and so on and so forth. But then, when eventually there is a change in the mood of the international markets, and normally this change is alien to the periphery, it happens because of things related to US market or European market. then there is a flight for liquidity. And then obviously those peripheral assets are the first assets should be abandoned in a quest for liquid assets, the central currencies and assets issued in the central currencies in the central countries. So this movement is not individual, it's collective. So it constitutes at the end of the day what we name as international liquidity cycle, right? What the literature names as international liquidity cycles. So, and then there are beautiful names for this process. So the investors, they name the emerging markets, so Brazil is an emerging market, and then now they have this new concept, you probably saw it already, the IMF uses it as well, the new frontier markets. So markets where investors can search for higher yields. Next slide. It's very interesting in doing research. I found this paper which comes from the Harvard Business Review. So it's not at all a critical paper, it's the contrary. But you can see the figure they use to talk about these new frontier markets. Caravels, it would be understood as a cartoon, a critical cartoon at Progressive International website or whatever, but no, it comes from the Harvard Business Review. It's not at all a critical cartoon, and it shows caravels. You see, so we're talking about the frontier economies. They show caravels. So even themselves, they know that it is related to what was done previously with colonialism. And then we can imagine that it has less blood and less violence, but it is embedded in structural violence as was mentioned as well. So it's a new kind of, it's part of neocolonialism. Let's move ahead. And it has blood and it has violence because it has harsh consequences for the periphery of the world. So the center has this exorbitant privilege, this expression which was coined by Valéry Giscard d'Estaing in the 60s already. The US has a lot of privilege related to the fact that they issue the key currency of the world. And next slide, for the periphery, it has a lot of negative consequences, obviously, which can be summarized in those three. Dependency on the international financial cycles, lack of autonomy for economic policy, and high external vulnerability, even if this external vulnerability nowadays is different from the one we had in the 50s in that century. Let's move ahead. And they are all burdens associated to the functionality. So again, it's not a deviation, it's not a problem of maturity. It works like this. It's related to the functionality of peripheral countries to the core countries in this dimension of the peripherality, the monetary financial dimension. Let's move ahead. So, and it has also some structural trends, and again we do an analogy with the International Division of Labor. We all know the trends which come from the International Division of Labor, the unequal exchange, deterioration in the terms of trade, and then when we go into the empirics of the International Division of Finance, we can see that there is a structurally a net transfer of wealth from peripheral to central economies through those financial channels. Let's move ahead. We did an empirical work. I won't bother you with that. But trying to see the international investment positions of core and peripheral countries and the yields generated through that, and also the capital gains in the periphery and in the center for both the external assets and external liabilities. You can go in the paper if you want. Let's next slide. But you cannot see it, sorry about that. But you can trust me. The first line in the top is the yields for the liabilities of the peripheral countries, and the other one with the arrow is the cost of liabilities in the center. And very clearly, obviously, and this is for 2003 to 2023 for almost all countries in the world. And then obviously the liabilities for the center is around 2.5%, and for the periphery it reached around 6% a year. Okay, it reached 8, now it's 6. And here again you cannot see the numbers, but we did this analysis also for yields, but also capital gains, assets and liabilities. And then for the central countries, the differential is positive, obviously, and then for the periphery, it was -5, so it's negative. Showing this, next slide, please. This structural trend of transfer of wealth from the periphery to the center, which combined to the structural trend related to the international division of labor, creates what we name as a double capture of wealth, both through the productive technological dimension and the monetary financial dimension. Let's move ahead. And then I arrive to my final remarks. Obviously, what we are trying to do here, what I'm trying to do here, is an analytical work. So we are making this distinction between the international division and the peripherality in the financial monetary dimension and the technological productive dimension for the sake of our analytical work. But obviously, it's the periphery has to be understood as a whole, and the functions it provides to the center also have to be understood both through the two dimensions. And the point is that the periphery has this functionality to the center, which is to potentialize the